There we go. So we are going live on Facebook. Oh, let me turn my volume. There we go. On Facebook and Instagram for the Your Healthy Mind Summit. So I have with me Dr. Radley Ramdhan. If you haven't had a chance yet to listen to his talk, it is all about understanding triggers and how to manage with those from PTSD. He is the author, so he is a naturopathic doctor and author of the book Trauma to PTSD, the root causes to healing branches. I always love talking with Dr. Radley because he has so much knowledge and insight on this. And he is a veteran himself. Hello, Dr. Nazi. Hi, Dr. Kirsten. And so if you were able to have a chance to listen to the talk and you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat wherever you're viewing from, and we'll be sure to ask those as we go. But feel free to just kind of tune in and you can ask questions along the way. So thank you so much for being with us here today, Dr. Radley.
Thank you, Dr. Kirsten, for hosting this event for a second year, and I'm very grateful to be part of it. I'm looking forward to see what the other years ahead has in store for us. Yeah. So I'm definitely excited to be here. Again, this week is Naturopathic Medicine Week, so happy Naturopathic Medicine Week to everyone joining in. Yeah. By chance, are you getting any feedback on the sound on your end?
I think we're good. I think, do you have your phone volume turned down?
I'm trying to get it down, but for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think we're good then. I don't hear it anymore.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to make sure we get that.
Oh, wait. She said she can't hear us. Who can't you hear?
All right. How about now?
Okay. Can you hear Dr. Radley? Oh, they can't hear you.
How about now? Could you hear me now?
Oh, good. Okay, great. Hello, and feel free to drop your questions in. Okay, great. So glad that you can hear us. Sorry about that. Yeah, so Dr. Radley, if you wouldn't mind, we'll kind of just start out with, oh, there we go. Are your headphones plugged into the Zoom one?
Yeah.
They're plugged into here. Okay. All right, well, we'll keep going. So if you wouldn't,
you getting enough feedback?
I am. Are you all getting feedback?
All right, here's what I'm gonna switch phones because for whatever reason, one of my phone always does this.
Oh.
The other one doesn't. So I'm just gonna switch phones real quick, right?
Okay. We'll be right back. Okay, let's see, because you can just hop on into this one. So sorry about that, everyone. We are getting set up. How are you all doing?
How about now?
Okay, I think we're good. Oh.
All right. Nope.
Oh, I still hear it.
Give me 1 second.
We'll see. And if anyone has questions while we're kind of figuring out the audio part, please feel free to drop them in. So like I said, the talk was all about understanding triggers, understanding how to navigate those, how to prepare ourselves for those potentially triggering situations. And so if you haven't had a chance yet to listen, you can still register, you can still sign up for the summit to have access to those talks. So feel free to register, or if you know anyone who may benefit from this knowledge that Dr. Radley has shared with us, or any of our other speakers, feel free to send them the registration link, because like I said, they will still be able to access those talks. So we don't want anyone to miss out on this. It's free. We're doing this for the month of May for Mental Health Awareness Month. Yeah. If you turn down your volume on, just turn it down low, like on your phone, just so that it doesn't. Yeah. Yep. I think that's good. Yeah. Okay. So Dr. Radley, if you wouldn't mind, we'll just kind of start out with just a little recap about example, what a trigger is, and who may experience having triggers. We'll kind of just start out there.
Okay, so triggers in short terms, it's basically something that sort of activates a memory. Triggers are not necessarily something good or bad. It could be something as simple as a sound, something that is visual, something that you smell, even taste. So anything that creates a memory associated with emotion or any of our five senses can become a trigger. A lot of time it's just a matter of being associated one with sort of like a negative event. And then it's a matter of like how we respond to being exposed to that same stimulus later down the road. So basically what happens is whenever we experience an event, we have all our five senses that sort of incorporate with that event. And within that, it creates memory in our brain. Once the memories are stored, it has an association with the five senses. So what did you see? What did you hear, smell, taste, and touch or feel, as the case might be. And then once you're re-exposed to those things, sometimes it triggers a memory back of the negative event. So that's kind of like a quick overview of what a trigger is. The way that we talked about in terms of helping to identify the triggers during our talk was basically correlating our five senses, taking a pattern of our emotions and our physical reactions back into the most original event that we could think of. That was the negative event. And then whenever our secondary triggers occurred. So for example, I'm gonna use the military, for example, right? You go to war and there's certain things that you would see, smell, hear. So one of the things that you might smell is things burning. You might see people running, or you might see blood. You might hear loud sounds. So that would be the original event, like you seeing what you saw with an explosion. Everything within that memory is stored around the different things that you either see, hear, smell, taste, or touch. And then you come back home from the war, and then you hear a loud bang, you hear a car backfire, and it becomes a trigger for you then, because it reminds you of the loud sound of an explosion. Or you smell tire burning, it reminds you of the smell associated with the event. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the same exact thing that correlates to become the exact trigger, but it's something similar enough to create a response in the brain to say, this song sounds familiar, the smell is familiar, the taste of something's familiar, the touch or feel of something is very familiar. or something that I see within it is very familiar. So that sort of allows it to become a trigger. In identifying it, once you could make the correlation between what you notice with the five senses on the original event and the most recent event, it sort of gives you an overlap there. Also taking into account the emotions associated with the event. So you think back and you reflect into what type of emotions were you experiencing during that original event, and then what type of emotions were you experiencing during the secondary event. Again, going back to being in a war zone, you might be frightened in that instant because of the loud sound, because of whatever you see or hear. And then you remember, all right, recollecting the car backfiring, you think to yourself, all right, my first emotion that I go into is fear. And then I go into, all right, I'm more hyper alert, etc. So you know that there is a connection there from an emotional level as well. The next thing you want to also do is sort of connect like the physical reaction. So you think back, okay, what could I remember my physical reaction was in the original event? Maybe sweating more, heart racing, changing breathing patterns. And then you think back again now to the secondary event that happened. And it's like, all right, what else happened during those times? The same thing happened. Potential sweating, change in heartbeat, change in breathing pattern, etc. So you use those things to help you identify the trigger. The hardest part is usually identifying the trigger and making the connection. Once you're able to identify the trigger, it becomes a little bit easier because now you know that, okay, when I'm exposed to a certain trigger, certain emotions created, a certain physical reactions created. So then you put into place different things that you could utilize for yourself to sort of help you from going into fight or flight and getting stuck there. We don't ever want to stop ourselves from going into fight or flight because it is our survival mechanism. So even though it sounds like a bad thing going into fight or flight, it's not really, it's part of our survival mechanism. So you want to be able to go into that, but you also want to be able to come out of it very quickly. And in identifying the triggers, you could help yourself do that. So you find different means of things that you could do to help yourself either relax or distract yourself in that given moment. So one of the things we talked about during the presentation was the crisis plan. So identifying things that sort of help you feel more relaxed, things that you could use as distraction techniques, be it breathing exercises, calling a friend, etc. Part of the crisis plan also talked about things like life goals and life plans. It's broken down into 3 different sections: short term, medium term, and long term. These are important things because in our subconscious, we know what our goals are. So sometimes when you get stuck in fight or flight, utilizing these things and having somebody talk to you about it allows you to make a connection back into your current reality. So for example, you've seen it in movies sometimes where people would be talking to each other and they'd be like, all right, remember, this is what you said you wanted to do when you get back home, or this is what you want to do in 5 years or 10 years. And by doing that, it sort of helps that person feel more grounded and more centered. And by that way, you could break that trend of being stuck in fight or flight. So that's where it's important to sort of identify goals and share it with the people, one, that you work with. And then within the crisis plan, we had a section of who can I reach out to? So those are the people that you want to share that with, so that at least they have access to that. And they know, like, all right, if you're being triggered or you're going down the rabbit hole of being in fight or flight, that you could utilize these as techniques to sort of help you break out of it and sort of get back into some degree of reality.
Yeah, I think that's a really big point because, often we're so focused on, like you mentioned, trying to get out of that fight or flight or trying to maybe suppress it. And so what you're saying is to, rather than suppress it, trying to allow, figure out how to better manage in the moment when those occur. And I know that you've talked about, so I think that's a great one, is being able to focus on something that you really care about, right? Something that is outside of that current situation. But you've also mentioned before just little ways to kind of ground. Like, let's say if you're in a moment when you don't have someone around to kind of help you navigate that, or to remind you even um, of those goals. Do you have any tips for those times?
So typically in those times, you want to do things that make you feel relaxed. And a lot of it, it's things that you have to practice as much as you could. So things like mindfulness, it's a good thing to help you break out of it, being stuck in fight or flight, because you could ground yourself very quickly if you practice mindfulness enough. It makes it easy even in a triggered situation for you to be able to identify, like, okay, I'm in my room at home, I'm no longer in the middle of a war zone, or I'm by a friend. I could recognize, all right, the color of the wall is blue or green or pink or white, and you could start using that to kind of help center yourself back into your current reality.
Hmm.
So mindfulness is always a big thing, in terms of that. Sometimes a simple thing is doing breathing exercises.
Yeah.
Breathing is something that you could control. So when you start focusing on your breathing, you could actually ground yourself a lot, because now it's like, all right, I have to focus on taking a slower breath, taking a deeper breath, holding my breath, and doing, for example, like the 4 square breathing, where you would breathe in, breathe out, hold, and breathe in again. So once it's something that you practice enough, it's easier for you to incorporate it into that time and space.
Yeah.
And once you have those simple things as that, it gives you something to ground in the moment. And there's tons of different things. A lot of it is really just finding what works for the individual and finding something that they're comfortable with. For some people, they might like writing. So if you have an opportunity in a stressful period to write, you could make a note of things there. You could write about how you're feeling and sort of ground yourself. If you like singing, you could use singing, breathing exercises, things like tapping, things like coloring, drawing, art. I mean, a lot of these things sound like it's things that are far out, but even if you're triggered and you're able to move out of that time and space. So say, for example, I'm in a room and I'm triggered by an individual. I could step away from that situation. I could walk away from that situation, take a deep breath, and come back in and feel more grounded to be around that individual or be around that specific situation. Um, any type of grounding technique basically is what you want to work on. And again, it goes back to how much you practice it on a regular day makes it even easier for you to implement it on that specific day. I know I mentioned tapping in terms of like a formal tapping, but sometimes just even tapping on your hand or your legs gives you a chance to break that concentration. And by you focusing on you doing that tapping on your hands or your legs, or even if it's like I squeeze my hands, but being mindful about what you do allows you within that instant to break free of being stuck in fight or flight.
Yeah.
And again, the more mindful of the environment, the situation that you are in, the easier it is for you to sort of get out of it.
Well, I really liked the example that you gave of even just noticing the color of paint on the walls and just starting to observe your surroundings, because I think some people are intimidated by the idea of mindfulness practices, or, am I doing this correctly? Right. When we think of meditation and things like that. But that's a really simple way to kind of ground yourself and just become aware, because really that's what mindfulness is, right? It's just becoming more aware and yeah, and allowing yourself to be more grounded. So that's a really simple technique that you can do anywhere. It's just starting to observe your surroundings, or like you said, even just like holding your own hand, like looking at your hands, little things like that to kind of help remind you of where you're currently at. Like, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm safe, those sort of things. Really simple, but I think that helps make it more approachable for people who, they hear mindfulness and they're like, I'm not mindful, or I don't know how to do that. What does that even mean? And like you said, it can be as simple as just observing the color of paint on the wall to reconnect with where you're currently at in time. So thank you for sharing those. And do you have any examples, whether from your own experience or from people that you've worked with, or just of an example of maybe a triggering situation, something that kind of helped them or helped yourself get through that, just to give someone who might be struggling with triggers an idea of what that would look like in real life.
Sure. One thing you mentioned, you said feeling safe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is always a big part of being able to break out of the triggers, because there's something, once you could tell yourself you're safe, it creates a big sort of distraction, and it gives you a little bit more perspective on being in reality. So that is something that I have used for myself, and I have had patients do, just telling themselves like, listen, I am safe. I'm no longer where I was a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever is a situation that is being sort of triggered. So I'm going to use myself, for example. Coming back from deployment, I have had sometimes where it's like nightmares, or sometimes a loud sound would just make you jump out of bed. And I had a habit of, when that happens, the first thing I try to do is look for my weapon. And then, because it's something that you have to do when you're there, you always keep your weapon close by, you always keep your body armor and stuff like that close by. So when you're in deep sleep, when you jump out, the first thing you do, it becomes sort of like an autopilot reaction. And that's what being triggered means. You just go on autopilot and you do whatever is there in your conscious or subconscious playing at that moment. So again, going back to waking up with nightmares or loud sounds, the first thing I used to do is try to search for my weapon, which I knew when I was on deployment was always on the side of my bed. Next to my weapon was always my kit, body armor kit to put on. So I've had times where I would jump out of bed and search for it. Sometimes it would be triggered by my dog jumping on the bed and waking me up. Sometimes it's by a loud sound. Sometimes it takes longer than anticipated to sort of ground myself. So the first step is identifying that I'm no longer where I was. So I used to be like, all right, Radley, you're in your room at home. You're no longer in Iraq. And then just sort of grounding and talking to yourself. A lot of it times come back just to sort of self-talk and being like, all right, I'm in my room. I'm able to identify, all right, this is the color of my wall. This is my bed. I'm no longer there. That's the dog in the room. I don't have a weapon. I don't have to look for my kit. And then you talk yourself back into sort of being grounded and being present. Within that, sometimes it's focusing on breathing exercises. I like writing. So writing, it's not something that I would first go to in terms of doing it. But when it happens multiple times, sometimes I would take a moment during the day or even after, like if I find it difficult to go back to sleep, I would take a little break and say like, listen, write about what is going on. Write about what you feel. And it doesn't have to be anything structured. That's the thing about writing. It's just whatever is coming up, just write about it. If it's art or coloring or whatever, just channel whatever energy into something more constructive or more productive that you have control of. With the breathing exercises, for me, it was just taking deep breaths. I would say I used to be guilty of not practicing a lot of what I preached before until I got into it and I came back home and I had my own personal struggles. I used to go to the VA regularly for therapy, which was helpful in itself. But for me, going to therapy, whenever you get to that 50th minute mark and they tell you, we have 10 minutes more, we have to wrap up, that was my shutdown period. I'm not typically somebody who was very open to coming right out from the beginning and talking about something right off the bat. So I would delay into getting to the point of what I really wanted to. And then by the 50th minute, they're like, all right, we have to close up, we have to wrap up, we'll pick up where we left off. Go back the next week, and I feel like I had the same repetitive cycle. That's just me because I'm not the person who would openly talk about something as easily. For some people, that works great because it gives you an opportunity to channel what you have inside bottled up in words. For me, it was easier to write about it, and not until I started working with a therapist that made me use writing as a means was that's when for me I found it most helpful. So that's how I utilize it with patients. And it's the same thing. It's just finding something that the individual like doing and feel comfortable enough to help you channel it. So even without being triggered, you want to still be able to take time out to work on those triggers, because once you're able to identify them, it's easy to say like, all right, I could take a moment when I'm feeling normal to sit down and write about my triggers, or sit down and say, draw or color about it. And I could say, all right, I'm coloring something. Red might represent the emotion of anger that I feel, and blue might represent fear, right? This is just random colors. You could pick whatever you want to mean, whatever you want. But the idea is just color or paint using those two colors and just channel that energy of the built up emotions or the built up frustration that you hold inside from being triggered. And then you utilize that as a means to channel it out. Going back into the actual event of being triggered, it really is just finding grounding techniques. And like I said, for me, a lot of it was just breathing and self-talk, being able to tell myself that I'm safe, I'm in a safe space, at home, this is my space, I'm no longer where I am no longer where I used to be or was before. And a lot of it, the more you do it, it's the easier it becomes. I would say in the beginning, I had times where nightmares would happen multiple times in a night, and multiple times in a week. And then eventually the more and more I did like those self-talks and stuff like that, it became easier that every time it happened, I could easily break out of it. So in the beginning, sometimes it would take me like 15 minutes to half an hour sometimes just to ground myself. Now it's like I could jump out of bed and I could be, all right, I'm safe, I'm okay. And I could do it within 10 to 15 seconds, sometimes even less. So again, it's a lot of like practicing things. And the more you do it outside of the actual being triggered, like practicing breathing exercises, practicing grounding techniques, being mindful, like you said, and it's a very simple thing. You don't have to make it a complicated thing. It's just focus. Mindfulness is just being as much aware of something within your environment. That's the easiest way to describe it. And it doesn't have to be focusing on every single aspect. You could just pick one thing and be like, what do I smell? What do I hear? What do I see? And then just focus on that. And then if you feel like you want to expand, you could expand. If you just want to focus on that one thing just enough to get you grounded, that's what you do. So the more you practice it on a given day when you're not triggered, it's easier for you to utilize it when the trigger actually happens or occurs. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your own personal experience. So thank you so much for being vulnerable with us on that front, because I know it's not easy to talk about. And also thank you for sharing the different types of methods, because I think people get discouraged when, maybe talk therapy doesn't work for them, or, they've tried one type of therapy or even therapist or practitioner, and it didn't work for them. and it can be discouraging, right? But there's so many different methods to help yourself move through these things, and so many different types of therapists and practitioners, right? So it's about finding the ones that work for you. Like you said, for you, writing it out. For other people, it's, going for a walk and like allowing yourself to process, right? We know walking can be really helpful for processing with the eye movement that is done when we're walking and moving forward. Even better if you can do that in nature, right? If you can do that in green space, we know how beneficial that is for our mental health as well. Just so many great points and examples, because like I said, I think it's helpful for people to just to have some examples of how that can look and how different it can look for each person, right? Because it might be something, if someone's raising their voice, say you're out at a restaurant, someone's yelling at someone else, that can be a very triggering situation for people. So to have just some tools to like you said, looking around, regrounding yourself, taking a moment to take those deep breaths, so then you're able to respond in a way that is your choosing versus one that is that reactive kind of state, that maybe related to the kind of initial event or events that created that. And let's see. So Dr. Kirsten says, yes, most of the time when people feel unsafe, it's the fear about the future. And for, especially with triggerings, it's, often related to things that have happened in the past, but just reminding ourselves that right now in this present moment that we are safe. And then Juan says, great practical explanation of the triggers associated with PTSD. And it sounds like, you're referring to utilizing the fight or flight response instead of suppressing it or fearing it. Yeah, that's a good takeaway. That's what I recognize too. And that mindfulness allows us to be more intentional and maintain control even in those heightened triggered circumstances. Yeah, I really think that's a big part of your talk. And so like I said, if you haven't yet listened to Dr. Radley's talk, he kind of goes through this process that he works people through, and provides some examples in there as well. So you can still sign up through the summit. If you the link is in my bio, you can feel free to send that to people that you think may benefit, right? Because I think there's so many different types of triggers, and so they can be big or small, right? It's different for everyone. So I think we can all really benefit from having an understanding of how to cope and manage when those do come up. Yeah, the nightmares. Yeah, it can definitely feel like deja vu. Yeah, well, thank you for being here to, I'm glad that you were able to learn something about how to deal with those triggers. Just reading a comment here. And does anyone have any questions so far of anything that we've talked about? I know we've kind of talked about a lot of different parts of this. Of course, it's a big topic, right? But so helpful. Anything else that you would like to just be sure that we touch on, Dr. Radley? Anything else that has been helpful for you or for your patients, that, because like someone mentioned in the comments, this is new to some people, that there's even a way to process some of these triggers or like the nightmares, right?
So I would say it takes time. It's not something that you just do it once and you figure all the triggers out. Sometimes within triggers, new triggers are created. Triggers could be sometimes, like I said, physical things that you could see. Sometimes it's an emotional thing. Once you're able to identify, like if you go through again the steps that we talked about, correlating the five senses, the emotional reaction and the physical reaction, it gives you a good step to identify for yourself. The more you practice mindfulness, the easier it is for you to identify when you're being triggered. Once you're able to identify that step, that's when you put in sort of your grounding techniques. So for example, you might say, I'm triggered by a certain person, right? You're able to figure out, all right, I'm triggered by a certain person. Before you're fully triggered, you would have some type of emotional reaction being stimulated. You would have some type of physical and physiological reaction being stimulated. So sometimes it might be a change in breathing pattern and I'm getting angry. Being self-aware and being mindful of yourself, really, it could help you identify like when you're getting into those feelings. For example, like people say, I could feel butterflies in my stomach when I'm anxious, right? You know what that feeling feels like because you are self-aware of it. It's the same thing that you could use for triggers. You could be like, all right, I noticed that my hands are shaking or my breathing patterns changing. Once you're able to identify that, it's the first phase of actually being triggered. So you could stop yourself from going all the way into actually being triggered. And that's what you want to focus mostly on. Identifying the triggers is, like I said, it's a big step and it's definitely important, but also identifying that emotional response and physiological and physical reactions that we create with them is important, because now you have an extra step in there to identify when you're being triggered. And like I said, sometimes triggers are very simple things. Like I say, it could be simple things like sound, smell, taste, things that you see. One of the things that used to trigger me a lot was seeing people running. And it's partly because a lot of times that was a trigger for us, or that was an indicator for us that something was going on base, right? So if you see people running, it's not normal to see people running. When I came back home and I go for a walk, every time I see people run, like I feel anxiety developing from that. And then I had to slowly start to talk myself into it, like, all right, this is a safe space. This is what is going on. People are running for a normal reason. They're not running because they're scared or something is happening. So once you're able to identify those things, you could work backwards and be able to center yourself, ground yourself before you get stuck in fight or flight. Also, Dr. Kirsten made a good point in terms of not everything is the same for everybody. Like I said for myself as well, I seeked help. It took me a little while before I seeked help, because I was one of those people who I came back home. I was like, no, I didn't think anything was bad. I'm perfectly normal. And I started noticing changes within myself. I started noticing changes in the way that my studying patterns, memory patterns, struggling to be able to remember simple stuff from class, even sometimes struggling to remember like what I studied 10 or 15 minutes ago. And then I would look back at it after taking a break and I would feel like I never saw it before. Even in the way that I responded with patients, because some of the patients that I had when I came back from deployment were some of the same patients I had before I left for deployment. So basically what happened was I got deployed in the middle of my last year of school. When I was supposed to graduate, the October of the last year of school is when my unit got activated and we got deployed. So I came back home in the middle of a semester to continue my last year of school, just adapting to coming straight back into midterms and all of those things. To me in the beginning, it was like, all right, maybe it's just an adaptation phase. Maybe it's not me having struggles with certain things. And it definitely was a combination of different things that was going on, but it took me time to identify that, yes, something was off or something was not normal for me. I did have some professors who I was close with before I left, and even they started pointing it out, like, Radley, something's different. You're not your normal self. You're not performing as good as you used to in class, even in clinic. Like, we could see that you're not up to your 100%. And that's kind of like when I was like, all right, yes, I'm actually seeing some of these same patterns. And I started reaching out for help. It took me more than a year before I met with one doctor who decided to do writing. And we were just having like a casual conversation after one of our sessions or before one of our sessions. Can't remember exactly. And I told her, like, I like writing and I use writing as a means to sort of distract myself and de-stress. And I've always used it. And she was like, well, I just learned about something called written exposure therapy. Is it something that you'd be interested in trying? And from the next week, we started doing it. And I noticed a significant difference. Like I said before, every time I go for talk therapy, it's difficult for me to talk about what I want to talk about. And all the time, every week I'm going in, then this one week we did the written exposure therapy. And the week after, I was able to talk about things a lot easier. I felt more comfortable even discussing it with professors, even discussing it with friends. I felt like a huge burden lift off of my shoulder. It was one of the first days that I actually slept really well, was the night after doing the written exposure therapy, even during the day. So my appointment was in the morning. I was supposed to come back and go to school for clinic in the afternoon. When I came back home, like, I felt wiped out, and I reached out to my supervisor and I was like, look, I really don't feel like I could come in today. And I know it's like a last minute notification. And she was okay. She's like, go ahead, take the time, because I told her like why I had to leave earlier in the day and stuff like that. And I fell asleep after I reached out to her, and she's like, don't worry to rush to come in. If you need to come in a little bit later, that's fine. And I fell asleep for probably like 2.5 to 3 hours. And when I woke up, like, I actually felt this burden lift off of my shoulder, and I felt like things were being easier to actually deal with. And again, that was because writing is a means that I use and I have always used, and I feel comfortable with channeling things out. And it just goes back to that, finding something that works for you, finding a healthcare provider that works for you, because not every healthcare provider provides the same thing. And by you giving up on one means you're giving up on yourself more than you're giving up on the practitioner. What might work for one individual might not work for you. And what might work for one traumatic event might not work for another traumatic event for you, even as an individual. So sometimes some things you could talk about very easily and you could get everything off your chest. And some things you would find it very difficult to talk about. And you'd be like, well, I don't understand why I'm unable to feel the same benefits. It's not that it's not working, it is working, but it's probably not the most effective thing for that specific event for you. So it's always important to take the time, try things different, do different approaches, and see what works for you for that specific event and that specific time. And once you do that, I could pretty much guarantee that you would get a lot more help from that, rather than saying, I tried writing once and it didn't work for me. I tried drawing once and it didn't work for me. I tried talk therapy and it didn't work for me. Like I said, everything might be different, even for the same individual and even for different individuals. It's all about finding the right approach for the right time. I might be the perfect person to work for one aspect of PTSD for an individual, but Dr. Kirsten might be the perfect person to work with for another aspect of it. So again, keeping your mind open and keeping your options open to working with different people, keeping an integrative option open as well is always important, because you never know who could help you when and who would be most effective for which situation in a given time.
Yeah, and I think that reminds me of the idea of, well, one, building the team, right? Like both your healthcare team that's right for you, but also your community, like your friends and family, because everyone has a different strength, right? Even within our friends and, like I said, our community. And so it's really important to recognize that with the people that we do reach out for to help, um, even just on the day to day, and having, we've talked about this in the past, but having that list of people, so that, let's say one person isn't available or they just don't have the capacity to be with us in our current moment, if we're needing some companionship, having other people or other methods to utilize or people to turn to during that time. I just think that's so important. We're not an island. We're not meant to be doing, all of this work on our own and figuring it all out on our own. And but also recognizing that just like how different practitioners have different strengths and modalities, the same goes for our friends and our family. Everyone has a different strength, a different capacity, different way of connecting with us. And so I think sometimes we have these expectations both for our doctors, our practitioners to be everything to us. And we do the same thing sometimes with our loved ones and with our friends. We expect them to be everything, and that's just not how people are. Like we're all so different, and like I said, we all have our different strengths. And so recognizing that both with our practitioners as well as with our loved ones and family members, and once we take that expectation away and we're able to appreciate the strengths that they do bring, it helps us too, because then we're not feeling let down by others, or we can appreciate what those strengths are that they do bring to us, and we can do the same to others, right? We can also like have these high expectations for ourselves to be everything to everyone. I think particularly those who have experienced trauma, and that's just not how we're built, right? We like just I think that's part of the healing process, is learning to um, understand our own strengths and really love those, and see that in other people too. So that's just something that kind of came to me. And then looking at some of the comments too, it really makes me think a lot of the purpose of, the talk, right, about triggers and understanding that is so that we don't have to live, like Juan said, we don't have to live in fear, right? We can, or avoidance, which is, sometimes necessary, especially maybe early on, or just with depending on where we're kind of at in our healing journey, right? Like that might be necessary for at times. But we want to be able to live, not out of fear. Like we want to be able to do the things that at one time brought us joy, or to be able to have a full life experience and not let the fear of being triggered keep us from having that experience. So I really think that's a big part that I took away from listening to you and talking with you, is a big part of it is not feeling like we need to avoid everything.
Yeah, that is definitely something that I wanted to get out of it,
Mm-hmm.
because, like I said, triggers are very common things. It's things that are there within our everyday life. And if we really try to avoid every single trigger, we would pretty much lock ourselves in a box and we
Yeah.
wouldn't really be able to live. So the goal really is to try to be exposed to the triggers without being triggered, more or less. That's what you want to get to. You want to be able to be comfortable enough that if I go out and a certain song was a trigger for me, I could be exposed to it without getting stuck in fight or flight. I could go out and a certain smell doesn't affect me. And it's like I said, it's sometimes it's very simple things. One of the things we talked about in the pre-recorded session was some of the common triggers that are there. And those are very simple things that happen to us in our everyday life. And I'm not going to go into details
Yeah.
in it because I want you guys to really watch that. And there's more emphasis on it in there. But understanding like those simple things makes a big difference, because a lot of times people walk around triggered without realizing that they are being triggered. And it's not until you're able to identify those triggers within your life that you are truly able to live and thrive, as the saying go. You don't want to just be stuck in survival mode. You want to be able to actually thrive and live to your fullest, live your purpose. And the more we allow triggers to control our lives, the less we actually live in our purpose and our best self, as the saying goes. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions before we kind of wrap up here? Thank you all so much for joining us and taking the time to listen in and learn from Dr. Radley. If you haven't already, he does have a book, like I mentioned before, and he gives so many great tools in here for helping with trauma and PTSD. He gives so many worksheets and exercises in there as well. So be sure to get a copy. And where can people find you? Where can people find a copy of your book? Where can they work with you?
Okay, so for the book, the website is www.trauma2ptsd.com. There's within that, it would give you a link to order the hard copy, or give you a link to the directly to Amazon page to order the ebook if you like from there as well. In terms of reaching out to me, email is an easy option. It's universal3, universal3hc@gmail.com. So universal3hc@gmail.com. Both my pages on Facebook and Instagram are Universal Tree Health Clinic, so you could reach me there as well. Messaging on Facebook, it's not always easy because I don't always get the notification of the messages there. So I tend to take a little bit longer to reply to messages on the Instagram. I get my notification a little bit faster there. So you can reach out to me there as well. And on YouTube, I have a page. It's Dr. Radley Ramdhan. There's a couple of videos on different talks similar to these that I have on there. And I do plan on doing a couple more events with that. So I do hope that any one of those ways are pretty much accessible to reach out to me. Feel free. If you have any extra questions beyond this, you have my email, and feel free to reach out as well. So thank you again, Dr. Kirsten, for having me. It's an honor being part of this again for a second year. And like I said, I do look forward to seeing this event evolve over the years.
Thank you. Yes, thanks so much for continuing to share your knowledge and your own experience, right? Being vulnerable with us. I think it just really helps people to understand themselves a little better too, when we're able to share and be vulnerable. So thank you so much for, again, just for taking the time and being a part of this with us. And like I said, if you haven't yet signed up for the summit, it's free. We're doing this for Mental Health Awareness Month, so completely free. All you have to do is register, so you can still get access to these talks. So share that link with friends, family. I really think this is just so important for all of us to be aware of, so that we can continue to, like you said, live our best lives, right? That's the goal. So thank you so much. And we will see you all in the next live, okay? All right. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you so much.